Hello and welcome to this News18 digital exclusive. My name is Anand Narasimhan, and joining me now is the editor in chief of the Washington Outsider and the president of Rising Inc. That's Irina Tsukerman. Irina is also a prolific writer. She's done a lot of papers and she's studying patterns, religious patterns, foreign policy she speaks on, and a gamut of issues. So we're gonna stick to some aspects which are affecting India too, Irina. So I read a few comments of yours and your thought process on what is happening with India. Now, I'm talking to you at a time when we are seeing a rise in this chop the head off, or what's being called Sartan Se Juda kind of thing, which is being pushed by fanatics from Pakistan. And we saw this manifest in some other parts of the country, of the world too. So, are there forces which are deliberately fueling radicalism and fundamentalism? And do these have a certain level of state backing? So, let's start from there.
Well, absolutely, yes. Something like that does not happen incidentally. India itself has a very long tradition of integration, and this is not something that is native. Internally, of course, there's been clashes, there's been tensions over time, but nothing of that sort that is similar to what ISIS has been doing in the Middle East. And ISIS too did not emerge out of nowhere. It emerged from an Islamist movement, but specifically ideology. It emerged from people radicalized in prisons, and it this idea of beheadings, it harkens back to a specific pseudo-religious sentiment. Um, this is not a state execution. This is an execution by forces that take it upon themselves to decide whose lives are worth living, and who they don't have any compulsion about beheading innocent people like the shopkeeper in India who started this chain of events. Now, uh, the context for this also, there's been recent riots in Hyderabad and other areas, and those riots were openly instigated with state backing. We have seen um, that the riots followed an incident where one official who has since been suspended made a religious comment. And of course, many Middle Eastern countries expressed distaste for that, but after that person was removed, you would think that the reaction was slowed down. But some states, like Qatar, for instance, and Pakistan, continued instigating the anger until it fueled a wave of violent protests. We are seeing a similar sentiment at hand with this behaving that follows the same type of pattern. And we have seen the same type of forces mobilized in other instances around the world. So we can safely presume it's the same countries and the same people behind it. We have seen Pakistan, we have seen Turkey, we have seen Malaysia and Qatar specifically, also known as the Islamist Quartet in the past, rally behind domestic audiences in various countries when they were dissatisfied with with what was happening there, not for any real diplomatic reason that could be resolved with the government, but to instigate popular backlash against those policies. We have seen that in France specifically, when President Macron in the past had tried to
Yeah.
limit the influence of Islamists in the mosques, cultural centers, and education inside the country. Presumably, that threatened the influence of those two countries. Pakistan and India have had a long history of tensions, and we have seen that in the past, Pakistan has backed radical groups in Kashmir, but also elsewhere inside the country. We had seen that the terrorist attacks in Mumbai and elsewhere had Pakistan backing. So the services of that country and various groups inside it also have had no compulsion about fueling violence, but there's more than just Pakistan to the story. We are also seeing that groups that had previously been relegated to the Middle East and other parts of the world, they are merging with the native radical Islamist groups in Southeast Asia. They're increasingly being pushed for influence. Muslim Brotherhood that comes from the Arab world is increasingly affecting these ideas, and ISIS, which had previously also emerged in the Arab world, we are seeing them springing up in nearby Bangladesh. We are seeing influence of ISIS ideology on these groups that there were obviously other radical terrorist groups native to the area, but we are seeing that they are being influenced by outside foreign forces, and we are seeing that those foreign forces also in some instances have state backing when it is convenient for them. So we are seeing a strategy of several state actors of fueling extremism and radicalism in India for the effect of causing domestic polarization, tensions, and trying to alienate the Muslim community from the rest of the country.
But what do they stand to gain here? What's in it for them to try and disrupt social or create social disharmony in India or in some other nations? Is this part of their comprehensive national policy, or is it just being fueled by pure religious bigotry?
Some of it is certainly opportunistic. Whenever there is an incident, they jump on it because it is convenient, and this is what happens with any country and any situation around the world. Somebody who has some political differences will certainly look for an opportunity to criticize, to meddle, and to just use it for their own political gains. But a lot of it is strategic. We are seeing a strategy similar to what we have seen during the Cold War called controlled chaos. Usually, the controlled chaos strategy had been aimed at smaller countries, proxies of the Soviet Union and Western countries, in an attempt to disrupt the order there and by proxy to impact the strategy of the larger actor. But India is a large actor, so we are seeing this effort now becoming more populated towards bigger countries. We are seeing similar processes happening in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere, even in major Middle Eastern states. So this controlled chaos has been relegated from proxy warfare to direct ideological and information warfare against target countries. The aim of it, of course, is to cause destabilization, to cause polarization, to weaken the country from within, to cause tensions between different portions of its population, to play to sentiments among other groups, and I don't just mean necessarily Muslim communities in this instance, but also groups that are leaning in specifically disaffected, critical of the government for other reasons, or critical of the social situations for other reasons. This sentiment is targeted to them just as well as to the direct Islamist groups who are already there, because the effort is to uh, preoccupy the country with internal domestic matters, make it less of a credible actor, and also create bad optics for the outside world and disrupt its foreign relations as well. Because frequently, um, radicalization is only part of the game. The other part of the game is the media and optics around the PR value of reporting on these issues. If you see the coverage of what's going on in India, typically it's very shallow. Most of the reporting is concerned with economics or major state visits or major state developments, but to the extent internal issues are reported, they're frequently very critical of India, one-sidedly. So you see media campaigns, and a lot of them are aimed at specifically these issues, and the narrative is built that these people have real grievances. The government is not meeting them, the society is rejecting them, and this is why they're doing what they're doing, and they're wrong, and they're right, and everyone else is wrong. So the value of it is also for the external world to put outside pressure on India and to cause to disrupt the alliance between India and other countries who are critical of the state actors and these movements.
But to do something like this, you need an organization. Is it possible that a quartet of nations that you called as the Islamist quartet, do they have the wherewithal to do it? Or do these entities transgress national boundaries and these entities just remain because Who are these people now, and how do they generate money? I know you've written a very detailed paper on the Muslim Brotherhood and how they have evolved. So let's try and deliberate on that, because in India we're seeing very unique forms of trying to create social divide, create social unrest. The template, the format has changed. There are multiple organizations. It's like a big hydra. But the
Mhm.
question is, where is the money coming from? The government has tried to push, clamp down on traditional routes. Hawala has been cracked down on. FCRA rules have come in, but still money is being funneled. Now we realize that they've used crypto also to a large extent. Cryptocurrency over the last 5 6 years. They're using drugs. They're using the narco route. So are these organizations also evolving very fast? So let's take it down one by one. One, how organized are they? Are they backed by a few nations only, or do they transgress borders? And three, how do they generate resources?
The actual the organizations, the movements that we are talking about, they have organizational structure, just as Muslim Brotherhood has organizational structure. It's traditionally had a centralized hierarchical structure with cells broken down by 5 members,
Hmm.
which are responsible to fundraising internally, then goes to the central apparatus. And this central structure is reflected whether inside a country like Egypt, where they first emerged, or whether they're in Europe, where they're located in Turkey, in London, and now increasingly potentially moving to Austria. But the structure is the same. It allows them to be highly exclusive. It's focused mostly on close familial relations to avoid being penetrated by outside actors and causing disruptions. And other terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda, like ISIS, have similar ways of creating very close knit networks. They Some of the other ones do outside recruiting, but again, it's based on a close familiarity with the people that they
Hmm.
interact with. And they also have hierarchical structure, with members being responsible for donations to the central body, which disperses them for various bureaucratic and structural needs. And they have a formal structure, formal bureaucracy, like any organization, but they also have the needs for clandestine operations, for espionage, for terrorism, and so forth. At the
Hmm.
same time, you cannot say that they are acting completely independently and that they don't have backing from state actors, because seen that Qatar is actually one of the largest donors to the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. We have seen that Turkey has been fundraising for specific groups inside India and the entire region. They're also assisting Pakistan with humanitarian needs, but some of that the nation gets siphoned off from general government used to the extreme groups backed by security organizations, and from there it trickles back into India for operations, espionage, and various structures, including kind of bureaucratic structures.
Hmm.
uh, Turkey and Qatar have been the main funders of all of this. Pakistan is not a wealthy country, but it certainly backs it on an operational level, and certainly from the state budget, allots some of the budget to particular assets that then
Hmm.
go on and carry out what they need to carry out. And Malaysia also provides operational support, not so much financial as logistical, in terms of being a travel destination where some of these people meet, where they plan their international or national operations. So there is for sure a coordination between non-state entities and their state backers, because even with all the fundraising coming from these bodies, because there's a number of distinct bodies, there's also tensions between them,
Yeah.
and sometimes they unify against common goal, for common causes, political campaigns, particular operations, terrorism. But sometimes they have a lot of internal divide, and what unifies them is this state backing and direction towards particular goals. Sometimes even with the state backing, they operate independently, and sometimes they coordinate.
Hmm.
Which brings us to the next point. How
Yeah.
do they overcome these limitations in Hawala system and this crackdown on the old school ways of fundraising. Older generations, sometimes even to this day, prefer to fundraise through tangible assets such as real estate, hospitality sector such as hotels, and tourism, because it's very easy to launder money through those activities, to manipulate the books, and to hide financing in behind purchases of land or buildings. That is becoming, as the governments are becoming more sophisticated in cracking down and tracing the funding about it, the methods are also evolving, and we are seeing that the new younger generations of extremists are much more sophisticated in what they use. For instance, they diversify. They don't completely shift away from these methods because they're tried and true, and you can't always catch them even with all these things.
Yeah.
But they also shift through for methods that combine illegal schemes, such as selling of cars, drugs,
Mm.
cigarettes through various triangulations among several different countries, but also but cryptocurrency, use of cryptocurrency, but also they change the legal ways of money, of laundering their money, from real estate and hospitality to high tech media and
Mm.
other major um, contemporary means of investment that allow them to both invest in stocks, shift money directly to specific structures established in those sectors, and also influence those sectors by
Mm.
coordinating with top level people in those sectors. We can see some of it with some of the high tech sector in Silicon Valley. We are seeing Islamist figures and figures from Qatar and some of the states align themselves at top level with Twitter, with Facebook, with Amazon.
Mm.
We seen Tawakkol Karman. She's a Yemeni Islamist at the head of the Facebook Supreme Court, but we are also seeing that the Facebook is coordinating with some of these groups on lawsuits, um, on the running of the company. But you can be sure that there's also a lot of investments. We are seeing some of these individuals buy off stocks in Twitter, for instance.
Mm.
We have seen some figures from some Islamists from the Gulf invest
Mm.
in Twitter stock because it gives them both financial power, ability to launder money, and as well as contacts and influence in the operational sector. So
Mm.
with the media as well, the same thing happens. There is some of the most effective founders of Islamist operations, both ideological and beyond soft power institutions into kind of more on the more extreme end. They have been traditional investors in major media,
Mm. Yeah.
news in the West, other companies. Probably the same thing is happening in India as well, because it gives them leverage, it gives them power to be seen as legitimate figures who are supportive of particular causes. They don't necessarily officiate that they keep their investments into Islamist causes very quiet. They usually also are seen as funding interfaith collaboration, actually, and that's how they are both also launder their money, but at the same time, they give cover to ideological investments into own resources in that way. And through the media, this gives them access to particular figures in the media. So they invest both financially into the financial structure, and they make money off of it, and they move money around through the structures, but also they gain ideological access to editors, to producers, to journalists inside those companies.
Yeah.
They disseminate their ideology that way and their agenda that way.
Well, that's quite elaborate for them to be able to do all of this. So it's all managed centrally, or is there just a direction given and then you have, many hubs, and each of them continues to function. So it becomes organic after some time, uh, or and but then you have a lot of inorganic offshoots too.
I would say it's a combination of factors. It's called similar to Al Qaeda. They have a centralized, decentralized approach, meaning big operations are approved at the top by a small group of operatives. Sometimes it's just one country, and sometimes if it's a transnational operation aimed at several different targets, whether it's a media operation, like a discreditation operation, or a major terrorist attack, or a particular funding scheme. Sometimes you have several lead actors come together and work on it jointly, but regardless, the approval comes from the top, but then they allow the movements to kind of organically disseminate whatever needs to be done. So you see, as with Al Qaeda, you get top level approval, but then the implementers recruit their own people to carry out the attack,
Hmm.
or to carry out a campaign of particular sort, and they organically find and recruit whoever is useful to the operation, which means whether finding outside supporters and outside useful supporting actors, or working together with other organizations on some elements of the operation, or some of that campaign. So at the bottom level, at the execution level, they are generally more organic and less coordinated. At the top level, you can always see the same types of people in different combinations.
Hmm.
You can usually, if you look at several major campaigns or operations, you will always see that it comes from the same sources.
Same sources. So, but why India? Why is there a particular need or some reason why India is being very clearly targeted? They just one gets to see, is this politically driven because there is a sentiment against Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the BJP and this entire aspect of Hindutva, or trying to counter Hindutva forces, or is that just a sufficient angle or a reason why they want to continue pursuing this? Or the other aspect is that India becomes the biggest player in the global market today as an alternative to China. It becomes, it's trying to project itself, it's trying to establish itself as the voice of the developing world. Or is it a combination of factors? Or would you go back a little more and say this is a civilizational fight? This has been going on for centuries, and perhaps this is just a continuation, a more modern manifestation of the same.
I would say it's a combination of factors, including what you just said. For the extremists, of course, it's a transnational fight, but even extremists choose where they fight their fight. Some of the elements of Al Qaeda had traditionally been focused only on Egypt, even though they could have been trying to take over the whole world of non Muslim groups, or even Muslim states that they found insufficiently pious from their perspective. But in reality, um, some of it is driven by state interests, and therefore the direction of specific target focus here as opposed to somewhere else. There, you always have to make the choice. What do you prioritize? Do you prioritize a global agenda? Do you prioritize taking care of your local national apparatus? So, of course, people local to the area, it is easier for them to penetrate the areas where that they are familiar with, particularly if they are using combined approaches, not just of occasional terrorist attacks, but ideological warfare, protest, destabilization, soft power, infiltration of institutions. If they're trying to take over from all levels, then it makes sense for them to stick to areas that they are more familiar with from the perspective of outside actors. However, India is a geopolitical reality. It's pro-Western. It's increasingly part of a Western alliance, which makes it more effective in coordinating both its military, security, and political and economic resources with the Western countries, which makes it dangerous. It makes them dangerous from a perspective of regional influence. For Pakistan, it's definitely becoming a rival. In the past, the West was more aligned with Pakistan, whereas India had been traditionally aligned with Russia. That's starting to change a great deal, and Pakistan is losing power faster than India, for instance, is becoming pro-Western. But nevertheless, the disparity is there, and it's concerning. There is also China, which is obviously a secular communist country that discriminates against its own Muslim populations, but
Yeah.
has it has no problem aligning with Islamist actors for its own geopolitical goals, and India is quite simply a geopolitical rival. It's an
mm,
economic rival, and it's the only power that can really stop it from economic perspective, because India is becoming a more preferred source for Western companies to deal with. Also, from a
mm,
political perspective and from a military perspective, it's also a rising power, and has
mm,
also significant population resources that could offset the demands of China.
mm,
So, but of course, you also have other geopolitical agendas. For instance, from the perception of countries like Turkey and
yeah,
Qatar, far away. Qatar is a tiny Middle Eastern country. Most of its population consists of foreign workers, many of them
yeah.
from Southeast Asia,
India.
India, exactly. So, from their perspective, what does such a small country need from India? In reality, a lot. They want to have influence wherever possible. They want to isolate other countries from potential regional rivals. They're not a fan, despite the fact that they have come to some superficial agreements with their neighbors in the Gulf. They're not a fan of some of them, and they don't. They're rivals for influence in India uh, for political influence. They're looking
Mm,
to become a power far beyond their own size. And for Turkey, it's also an economic issue. They have energy concerns. They have an economic crisis at the moment. They're also Erdogan specifically has at various times tried to portray himself as the leader of Muslims worldwide,
Muslim.
not just in Turkey, which includes significant populations in India. For him, obviously, taking down India completely is not realistic, but becoming a rising power and taking control of the Muslim populations there, that's a legitimate goal. Malaysia is
Mm,
simply like it's more focused on ideological goals and is supporting all this cast of characters for ideological reasons. It simply likes that ideology and wants to see it applied everywhere as much as possible. Obviously, again, does that mean completely overturning control in the government in the largest democracy in the world? That's probably unlikely, but causing enough problems to make a difference, to make an impact, to make it less functional, and to grab pockets of influence with particular groups and particular alliances. Again, the red
right.
green alliance, as people call it. That's a realistic goal, and we're seeing happening in other parts of the world already.
But we're also seeing that in a lot of the Gulf countries, there is a turn towards or a rejection of the radical forces and a turn towards modernization, liberalization, a far more moderate approach. We see this even in the Islamic world. But in India, there is a certain sense which one believes that there is a rise in radicalization, and there is an active, hyperactive, hyperactivity of the Islamist forces, which is now manifest. So clearly, they've been doing their work for a while. My final question to you, because I know we have paucity of time, so we'll try and continue this conversation. But right now, I want how does India as a country counter this? How does a nation of 1.4 billion people, which officially, unofficially has at least about 4 crore illegals, so it has nearly 400 million illegals, sorry, 40 million illegals. How do you deal? How does this a nation like this deal with forces such as these?
Well, first, I will very briefly address what the Muslim countries have done and why it's different. First of all, most of these countries are not strictly speaking democratic. They've had some element of authoritarianism or monarchical rule, which makes it very easy to control their populations. Second, their populations are significantly smaller. They're a fraction of what India has. Even Egypt is about 110 million people, which is significantly smaller. It seems like a big country, but it's still much more manageable.
Yeah.
Third, what have they done? They're working to take over institutions of soft power, which provide ideological influence for generations of people. And it has not been easy fight even for them. People had to be thrown in prison for spreading ideological incitement, and they faced a great deal of criticism and campaigns from the outside. So let's not let's not brush aside that there are always difficulties along the way, and the fact that the West is much more easy to penetrate and democracies are easier to penetrate by those forces. That's just a reality of political structure and governance. Coming back to India, absolutely number one priority is countering ideological warfare on all
Yeah,
levels. At the end
true.
of the day, you try to crack down on financing here, it'll, these groups will come up with some new schemes. So yes, it's great to focus your influence on the money trails. You need to be working with other countries effectively for that to happen. You need to be sanctioning foreign sources, arresting local sources, but you also need to make sure to provide a strong ideological basis against these influences. And unfortunately, in any democracy, whether it's India or anybody else, the very strength of giving popular will to the people makes it easier to exploit by various groups. They exploit institutions, they bury themselves among the populations, they use the media, they use popular sentiments. They play on the internal divisions. Democracies are messy. There are internal divisions. They combine their interests with fellow travelers and allies. And they also understand that in a democratic country, people are not necessarily thinking about ideological wars. They leave it to the governments. They think about
Mm.
making a living. They think about their relations with their neighbors, about the social realities. And this is, they build themselves on appealing on social realities, providing humanitarian assistance in the areas that the government finds it hard to reach,
Right.
exploiting cultural centers, exploiting close community relations, and exploiting this popular dissatisfaction with particular policies or issues or ideologies. And if we see what's going on around the world, these Islamist forces, they're flexible. They work with both extreme left and extreme right. So, strangely enough, I would not just be looking at the leftists who are traditionally aligned with these forces, but also at the extremists who become kind of useful dupes for these guys on the right, and who kind of
Mm.
by playing into their agenda, by taking the road of less
Mm.
thoughtful and more emotional, more exploitative. Sometimes they are not themselves aware of what role they are playing, and sometimes they end up being financed by groups that are deliberately hijacking them to create tensions. So I would actually look at both sides of the political
Right.
aisle, in terms of putting an end to the patching up the vulnerabilities. I would say that these extremists exploit very successful.
Very pertinent points made, and I think this is a vast subject, and there are many, many other aspects that we need to speak at length about. So we will connect again, and I look forward to speaking with you more often on these subjects. And you should also join us on my shows when we discuss international politics, foreign policy, and of course these forces that want to actually divide India and deny it its place in the world, the rightful place. So thank you very much, Irina. Continue to keep doing fantastic job that you do, and I really, really appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I look forward to joining you